On today's episode of What's Going On with Shipping, the U.S. East and Gulf Coast ports are on a countdown for a strike. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. Welcome to today's episode. So, the story that's not getting enough attention, in my opinion, is the fact that we are 2 weeks away. It's September 17th, 2024. On October 1st of 2024, the ILA, the International Longshoremen's Association, is going to be off contract with the U.S. Maritime Alliance, which means that dock workers on the U.S. East and Gulf Coast ports are going to go on strike. That has the potential to shut down the import of over 1 million containers into the United States every month. We're going to break this down, look at the background on it, what this means, and also what could be done to help fix this. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell to be alerted about new videos as they come out. So a lot of the maritime media is covering this in great detail. Here is G-Captain Mike Schuller, U.S. East and Gulf Coast ports brace for potential strikes as container imports surge. This is Sam Chambers over at Splash 24/7, 2 weeks to stave off supply chain chaos on the U.S. East Coast. Over at Sea Trade Maritime, Marcus Hand, U.S. port strike would leave imports from Europe stranded. And the Journal of Commerce has maritime employers prep for wind down of operations as longshore strike looms. Journal of Commerce is always very optimistic here that things are going to go well. So I'll have a link to all the stories. You can read them. But what I want to go into here is talk about what this impact is going to have and what is the big issues the two organizations have. To do that, let's take a look at these two organizations. So the USMX, or U.S. Maritime Alliance, again, I don't know why it's USMX. It's can't be USMA because that's the U.S. Military Academy. So they went with USMX. USMX is an alliance of container carriers, direct employers, and port associations serving the East and Gulf Coast ports of the United States. This is from their annual report. So Dave Adams is the chairman and chief executive officer, but I really want to show you the board of directors. So the board of directors are made up of a variety of different people. You have at the bottom there Port Association directors. So you have Jacksonville Port, you have the Shipping Association of New York, New Jersey, you have the Boston Shipping Authority. You have direct employers directors. These are the stevedores and port operators, Charleston Stevedoring, Ports America, and Gateway Terminals. And then the largest group you have here by 7 to 6 on the board of directors are the carriers. These are the ocean carriers. So you have Evergreen Shipping, that is out of Taiwan. The Ocean Network Express, that's out of Japan. Hapag-Lloyd, that is out of Germany. Maersk out of Denmark. The CMA CGM Group, that's out of France. Mediterranean Shipping Company, that is out of Geneva, out of Switzerland. And then the COSCO Shipping Line, that is the Chinese Overseas Shipping Line Company. Yes, that is the state-owned shipping line of China. They have a seat on the U.S. Maritime Alliance, which are negotiating with U.S. port workers. It's strange, but that's the system they have in place. Again, I don't come up with the systems. I just report on the systems to you. So here's the details we have discussing the amount of tonnage and man hours that are being used. You'll see that tonnage has been holding fairly steady here over the last few years, right around between about 170 up to 180 million tons. At the same time, we've seen a spike in the man hours being used, and this is one of the big fundamental issues that are at play here. In 2022, there were 51.7 million man hours that were used. In 2023, there were 47.8 million man hours. And the issue at play here between the two is automation. It is automating the ports, which means you would be losing jobs. And this is the heart of the issue. And this is not new. Let me be clear. This book over here, Port Newark and the Origins of Container Shipping, Angus Gillespie, great book. He talks about the fight between Malcolm McLean, the person who invented the container ship, and the Port of Newark, dealing with the arrival of the first container ships. There's a great line in there about the arrival of the first container ships, and Malcolm McLean meeting one of the ILA representatives who basically said that they should go ahead and sink the effing ship off the coast because they hated containerization because it was going to take jobs away. the issue here, but on the defense of labor side, and it's very important to have defensive labor, is automation is fine, but it needs to be negotiated. There was issues with the use of automatic gate systems down in Mobile, Alabama, and most importantly, the union wants to protect its workers, and particularly get into a system where they can start retiring some workers, ensure that they have money for their retirement, and start phasing down as you start automating. This is a big issue because U.S. ports tend to be some of the least productive ports that are out there. So the impact this is going to have, this shows you where USMX is. Obviously, they are everywhere. Port of Boston, Port of New York, New Jersey, Port of Philadelphia and Wilmington, Delaware, Port of Baltimore, Port of Virginia, Port of Wilmington, North Carolina, Port of Charleston, Savannah, Jacksonville, Miami, Port Everglades, Tampa, Mobile, New Orleans, and the Port of Houston. And you can see all the companies that are involved. This is global. Now, I will note that ILA is not in all those areas. There are certain areas that they're going to be able to get around because some states are right-to-work states, but the USMX and ILA have a pretty big footprint here when it comes to the ports. So this is going to be a major issue. Let's go over to the most recent document out from the USMX on the status of the negotiations. So this is the lengthy document they released on the status of negotiations. That's it. 3 sentences. I shall read for you now. There has been no further progress on master contract negotiations. The original master contract came into effect in 2018. It now expires in 2024. We remain committed to the bargaining process and need the ILA to return to the table. They are not even talking at this point. They are not at the table. And again, it's easy for USMX to blame ILA. It's both sides here need to come to the table. While there are fewer than 3 weeks remaining until the expiration of our current contract, if the ILA is willing to meet, it is still possible to agree to terms on a new master contract. We need to sit down and negotiate a new contract that avoids an unnecessary and costly strike that will be detrimental to both sides. I agree. And it's very important for both sides to be in this discussion. Let's go ahead and take a look at the ILA. So here is the ILA website. The International Longshoremen's Association is the largest union of maritime workers in North America. You may remember last year the ILWU, the International Longshore Warehouse Union, was in a negotiation with the Pacific Maritime Association. Now, the ILWU is in every port from Alaska down to San Diego. They have complete oversight of the entire West Coast. That negotiation had been going on, but what was interesting about that negotiation is that it expired. They went past the expiration date, and they were negotiating without a contract. This is a bit different because the ILA has made some statements, as you'll see here, concerning what happens when they reach October 1st. So on the ILA website, this is the most recent news concerning the issue. Get with the times. ILA tells USMX and stop your propaganda program. Leaders of the ILA slammed U.S. Maritime Alliance in a message to their members over the past weekend. Quote, USMX's corporate greed has made them delusional, profit over people. ILA President Harold Daggett and ILA Executive Vice President Dennis Daggett, yes, they're related, co-signed a message to the ILA's 85,000 members on Saturday, September 7th, providing them with a stark message that the two sides were far apart on many issues and warned ILA longshore workers against USMX's propaganda program, quote, designed to mislead and divide us. Goes on down here, quote, their interpretation of leading wages is polar opposite to ours. Inflation has completely eaten into our raises and wages. Everything has become more expensive, even compared to 6 years ago. Our members are struggling to pay their mortgages, rent, car payments, groceries, utility bills, taxes, and in some cases, their children's education. USMX corporate greed has made them delusional. Profit over people. They have taken advantage of how a low entry wage and a tiered progression system for 30 years. We outright reject their position on the new entry wage. This is the most recent statement that has been released by the ILA. It's a 3-page letter. I'm just going to read the intro and the end of it for you. I'll have a link to it in the show notes. The tens of thousands of International Longshoremen's Association longshore workers at ports from Maine to Texas are united as never before in their determination to win a new contract with their employers represented by the U.S. Maritime Alliance. In 2 weeks, they are ready to strike for wages that are commensurate with the billion-dollar profits earned by the ocean carriers. The strike at all ILA ports on the Atlantic and Gulf Coast at 12:01 a.m. on October 1st seems more likely, note, more likely as time is running out to get a new master contract agreement. Goes on, ILA longshore workers understand that the time is now to take a stand and fight a higher level of wages that compensate them for their contributions to enriching their employers and the industry and addresses high inflation that eats away at current salary levels. Quote, a sleeping giant is ready to roar on Tuesday, October 1st, 2024, if a new master contract agreement is not in place, says ILA President Harold Daggett. My members have been preparing for over a year for that possibility of a strike. That is, I'm going to say, a little bit ominous right there, that they've been ready for over a year to address this. The last paragraph kind of ends it all here. With an ILA membership united, coupled with an army of international dock worker unions ready to join the ILA in their battle against USMX, President Harold Daggett is certain ILA members will achieve a landmark agreement, even if it takes a coast-wide strike beginning October 1st to get it. I am of the opinion, reading these statements from the ILA, is they aren't kidding, folks. They are ready to walk out. And since they are not at the table negotiating, we've got 2 weeks before the East and Gulf Coast ports come to a crashing stop. Now, there is a question about measurement here. What are we talking about here? The focus is on containers right now. We don't know for specifics, and I don't know for specifics, if this is going to involve fuel, oil, LNG, passenger trade. I have seen none of that come out yet. ILA does do bags in many ports around the United States. So there could be impacts here on the passenger trade. I have not seen that for sure. What we do know is the impact it's going to have on containers. And for that, I want to come over to this story by Greg Miller over at Lloyd's List. The numbers don't lie. October U.S. port strike would be cataclysmic. East/Gulf Coast ports handled 51% of U.S. imports year to date in TEUs. Those are 20-foot equivalent units. 64% in tonnage. Greg is always great with some figures and facts, so let's go ahead and jump to them. So these are the imports into the top 5 U.S. East and Gulf Coast ports month by month. The blue lines show you monthly imports in TEUs. So in July, we're looking at over 1 million containers coming into the United States. From January to July of 2024, nearly 7 million containers came into the U.S. East and Gulf Coast ports. They represent just under 50% of all the containers coming in. If you stop hauling 50% of the containers into the United States, that is going to be significant. I can't say it more. There is no way that is not significant and cataclysmic. There are some writers out there who are trying to downplay this. I understand why they're trying to downplay it, but I think we need to be aware of this. Let's also be clear, whatever doesn't come in doesn't go out. And empty containers, which doesn't sound like very an important thing, but if you don't get the empty containers moving, it clogs the entire system up for months to come. To give you an idea of where this cargo is coming into the East and Gulf Coast port, of the 10 million containers that come in, roughly what we're looking, or excuse me, 10 million tons of cargo that come in, about half, a little over 4 to 5 million, come in from Asia. About 30% of that comes in from Europe, and then the last 20%, about 2 million tons, comes in from Latin American and other. That's a significant amount from Asia. Remember that cargo coming from Asia is coming through the Panama Canal. Now that the Panama Canal is back at full level, we're seeing a lot of cargo come in. The other 50% goes into LA and Long Beach. You can't take that 50% from the East Coast and put it into the West Coast. You will clog up LA and Long Beach. It will be worse than the supply chain crisis we saw a few years ago. You just can't change this. Plus, you need to set up warehouses, infrastructure. The road and rail system cannot handle it out of the West Coast. So this has a lot of issues. If we look at the data even more, we look at the share of total U.S. imports by region. For example, Asian imports, about 45% of Asian imports are coming into the East and Gulf Coast ports. If you look at European imports, about 85 to 90%, Latin America, about 75 to 80%, and all others you're seeing is, or all in together, roughly about 60% of all imports into the U.S. come in through the East and Gulf Coast ports. That Europe piece is really important because, remember, the Houthi have blocked the Red Sea. Large container ships are taking the long, circuitous route around Africa. They're going into Europe. And a lot of that cargo that goes to Europe, about 30% of the cargo that goes from Asia to Europe, gets transloaded, put onto other ships, and shipped over to the United States. That's not going to happen. And what happens with that cargo is it's going to pile up in terminals in Europe and clog the European terminals. This has massive butterfly effects down the entire global supply chain. Go over to a couple of charts here from John McCowan. John does a monthly report on containers. He takes us all the way back to 2017. And you see right here, the light blue is the amount of containers coming into Los Angeles. You see the big dip here back in the center part of the chart here. This is during the global supply chain crisis. Other West Coast ports, Long Beach, but also Tacoma and Oakland, are in dark blue. And then the red here is the U.S. East Coast. The U.S. East Coast had been on track to eclipse the West Coast in terms of total cargo. That had been going on since 2017. Matter of fact, if you look at this chart here, you can see that linear month by month. Back in 2017, the West Coast was handling over 56% of total cargo. It went below 50% right here in late 2021, early 2022. That matches with the global supply chain crisis. We saw cargo going in through the Panama Canal. Remember, we have that new lane in the Panama Canal that opened in 2016. So now you can move ships through the Panama Canal that aren't 4,500 TEU, but now 16 to 17,000 TEU. But notice what's happening here. Look at the 3-month trailing average. Where it bottomed out in 2022, middle of 2023, you get the new West Coast port agreement in place. This was falling because no one knew if the West Coast port agreement was going to be in place. But then when they started working without an agreement, cargo started returning to the West Coast. Then you get the West Coast port agreement. Now, in the past few months, it has spiked. The last few months here, we've seen a massive spike up above 50% here, going to the West Coast. Why is that? Because everyone is hedging their bets. What we've seen here is a massive influx of cargo coming in front of the October 1st deadline. And the cargo that's not going into the East and Gulf Coast ports, where's it going? Well, it's going to the port of Los Angeles, which just had a record-setting July on imports, 939,600 TEUs in July. Remember, the East Coast was handling 1 million TEUs. And now you have this happening just in the port of Los Angeles. And if you go look at Long Beach, same thing over in Long Beach. Long Beach is having a massive uptick. Everything's going on here. We're seeing an all-time record high in its 113-year history heading into the port of Long Beach. So what does this mean? Well, we got to get the ILA and the U.S. Maritime Alliance sitting down and discussing, because a strike in 2 weeks from today is not good. Now, I have heard very little from the administration, the Biden administration, acting Secretary of Labor Sue, or Secretary of Transportation Buttigieg on this. They have said, we really want an agreement. Okay, great. I don't want government intervention. Let me be clear. I'm not a big fan of that at all. However, they should be using leverage to get these two sides back into the table. Get Daggett and the ILA, get the U.S. Maritime Administration, Adams, back together, sit them down, and start negotiating. Lock them in a room until they come up with an agreement. They have to hash something out. The concept of a strike on the East and Gulf Coast of the United States is not an American problem. It's a global problem. This is going to cause consternation around the world. This is not good. The one saving grace we have right now is October typically is a peak month, getting everything ready for the holidays. Everything's been forwarded. Everything's been pushed up front. So a lot of that cargo is going to arrive before October 1st. And if it doesn't arrive before October 1st, it's going into the West Coast. However, Areas like manufacturing, they cannot front load orders. They still operate on a basically just-in-time style of logistics because they have to. You can't have large warehouses full of manufacturing components. You just can't. It doesn't work any good to have 20,000 pieces for a Ford F-150 sitting in a warehouse. You kind of flow things as they go. Plus, they're being manufactured, they're being built. You would require to plus up systems around the world, and you can't gear it up that fast. This system is going to cause us problems. We have to fix this before it happens. Everyone is, again, some people want to downplay this. It's going to be okay. Well, maybe a few days and it shuts down. Ever Given, when it got stuck in the Suez for 6 days, caused months of issues behind it. Look at what's happening with the Houthi right now. We're feeling that impact right now. You just saw freight rates drop. I mean, cataclysmically drop off a cliff, fall by $1,000. Why is that? Because everyone has pushed up their freight up forward to get it going. If, however, the East and Gulf Coast ports shut down, that's going to change everything. And what you'll see is a big spike again one more time as it happens. Plus, everyone's going to try to take advantage of the West Coast, jam into the West Coast, and we're going to friggin' do it again. The West Coast is going to be jammed up. Did a video a few months ago showing that already containers are piling up in the West Coast ports and terminals. Now, some carriers are going to be in a better position than others. You have carriers who bought terminals on the West Coast, so their ships are going to jump to the front of the line and get in there. Carriers like Maersk, for example, bought the APM terminal. They're going to be able to come in there and jump right to the head of the line. So some carriers are going to be in a really good position. Matson was always in a good position on the Pacific run because they have their own terminal. They were able to jump right in and go to their terminal. Plus, they were smaller ships and they could bypass a lot of the issues. However, people are going to start booking cargo on every fly-by-night container company out there, CU lines, SM lines, all these small regional container lines that are out in the West, out in Asia and running in Africa will shift over to the more profitable lines. And we could see the same thing that happened to LA and Long Beach in 2021 happen in LA and Long Beach in late 2024 and 2025. Never ends. It never ends, global shipping. You gotta love it. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so they'll be alerted about new videos as it comes out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How about helping out old Sal here as he works on putting together what is one of the best maritime YouTube channels out there dealing with global shipping? I think it's the only one. Yeah, it's the only one. It's the only one out there, so the best. Hey, how do you do that? You hit that super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. Until our next global shipping crisis, which should be any minute now, this is Sal signing off.